Remember to turn on all notifications so you don't miss a video. A plot is basically the list of events that occur in a story, but analyzing it is hard and rarely done. So here is a Umayskian guide to writing a good plot. All plots need conflict. If there is no conflict, then there is no story. There must be some problem that needs to be resolved. A good plot will always keep at least one conflict present in every scene, otherwise the scene is most likely pointless. The backbone of any story is setup and payoff. All 4 pillars of storytelling need to have this, which plot is included in. Every important event in your story should be set up. If you know you want event X to happen later in your story, make sure you set it up before scene Y. A good plot sets up an expectation for the audience and pays it off. This ties into causation. Events should be direct results of other events. That's still set up and payoff. You also don't want to set things up that you aren't going to pay off. A story shouldn't hint that 2 characters are going to fight if they never fight later in the story. The only exception I can think of is if it's an intentional red herring. That's one thing that should always be kept in mind. If you're going to break a rule, it should be intentional and with a specific purpose, not by accident. To increase the complexity of your plot, weave together several narrative chains. I define this as a chain of setups ending with a payoff. For a plot, this can be described as sub-stories that are being built up behind the specific events and scenes. Each sub-story could be a story on its own, but it'd be incredibly simple. The relationship between certain characters, progress on a specific objective, or new clues to a mystery. Multiple narrative chains can be progressed in one scene. The more narrative chains that you can synthesize into your story and scenes, the more complex the plot. 3-act structure is not necessary, but it's an easy shortcut to making an entertaining plot. Here's a simple way to visualize 3-act structure. Imagine a graph where the x-axis is time and the y-axis is the amount of progress. A regular story is character has a problem, character tries to solve the problem, character solves the problem. That's a complete upward line on the graph. 3-act structure, however, is problem, progress on the problem, some kind of failure, more progress, and finally success. This graph goes up, but at the midpoint it turns down and drops fast, but then it turns up again and picks itself up past the previous peak and ends on a high note. 3-act structure, specifically the midpoint, adds variation to the line graph, which makes it more dynamic. It's very hard to find good analysis on plots. Rarely anyone tells you what you should do. Instead, they just point out what not to do, which is easy. Meanwhile, I see a bunch of analysis videos on characters or settings or themes. That's because they're much easier to analyze. A good character is usually one that's realistic. Looking back at my video, most of my points connected to a realistic person. Personality, background, goal/purpose, change. All real people have these traits. Analyzing a setting is the same. How realistic, believable, and consistent is the world based on its own rules. Theme is a little different, but all you have to do is figure out the message and see if that message was delivered properly through the events of the story. Plot isn't like that. A realistic plot isn't necessarily a good one. Plots do have to have causation, which can be tied back to realism, but that's only a small part of it. Just because all the events have a logical causation doesn't mean that the plot is good. But if a character is realistic, they're basically perfect when it comes to just the character pillar. If we start including themes and plot, it gets more complicated. The same goes for setting. If it's internally consistent and makes sense from a real-world perspective with suspended disbelief, it's perfect. The reason is because characters and settings thrive on realism, but plot thrives on poeticism. Setup and payoff is not realistic, it's poetic. Real-world events don't always have satisfying and neat endings, but good plots do. All expectations are met. Since there isn't a real-world reference for setup and payoff, it makes it harder to analyze. It doesn't take a writer to point out an inconsistent character or setting, but it does take one to point out a lack of payoff to an expectation that was set up. In conclusion, a good plot consists of conflict, causation, and poeticism, and 3-act structure can be used to make it more dynamic. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and help me revolutionize the manga industry by buying my manga and spreading the word. All important links will be in the description.